So, as far as you're concerned, what's going on with regard to foreclosures? Have you been dealing with an increase, a decrease? Has the market seemed to stabilize?
Well, there has been a decrease in volume. We were running about 230, 240 calls a month from all over the state. Last year, we're a statewide organization. So that's dropped to about 150 calls a month, which is a considerable decrease. But when you look at the data, the foreclosure numbers are still much higher than they were before the foreclosure crisis started. So on the one hand, you have the good news of a drop in the numbers overall, but we're still running much higher rates than we were before the crash.
Sure. Shirley, is that your experience?
Well, I'd say our caseload related to foreclosure has been about stable, but what we're looking at is a difference in who the key players are, and also quite a few changes in terms of the laws that we're dealing with when we are encountering those cases. So in the tenant stock, the housing stock that's occupied by renters, when it enters the foreclosure process, oftentimes we're getting folks at the point where an eviction is what's on the horizon. And I would say 2009 to 2011, a majority of those were bank-owned properties. There were banks dealing with suddenly being sort of unwittingly the landlords to these tenants and not really wanting to be that. And I'd say currently we're seeing more and more investor owners at this point are the ones who are dealing with tenant-occupied properties, fewer and fewer bank-owned properties at this point.
That's interesting. Now, how do you explain the decrease? You went from like 230 to something like 150 or less. How do you explain that decrease? Is it the improvement in the economy or people who've lost homes?
Well, yeah, exactly, right? I mean, we've lost a lot of people to the foreclosure crisis. Remember in 2006, we had about 960,000 completed foreclosures nationally, which was a record number, completed foreclosures. And it went up from there to 1.1 million and then above each successive year. So we've lost a lot of people. And mortgage servicers were not following any of the foreclosure prevention guidelines initially in 2009 when the president signed the Home Affordable Modification Program into law. So we spent years wrangling with them, trying to get them to follow rules.
And would that have been HARP?
That would have been HAMP, the HAMP program. HARP is the latest iteration, and that pertains to, and it's a refinance program just for Fannie and Freddie loans.
Sure.
So.
Sure. Now, you experienced a decrease in terms of your clients. How would you explain that one?
Yes, but an increase in acronyms, as you can see.
Yeah, unfortunately.
One of the things that we saw a couple of years back, acronym-wise, was the PTFA, the Protecting Tenants at Foreclosure Act, that happened on the federal law level. And what that meant for us sort of here at home, in the Silicon Valley housing community, was that tenants were being sort of recognized as like the innocent victims in all of this, having had sort of no participation in what is, comparatively a fairly lengthy process leading up to the foreclosure. Tenants were being sort of hammered after the foreclosure point with information that was unknown to them at that point and being expected to act on it quickly.
So when you talk about the tenants, these are tenants who are renting from homeowners. Homeowners, apartment owners?
Yes, both. Most of the foreclosures that we've been encountering during this foreclosure crisis period affect buildings anywhere from 1 to 4 units. So sometimes, we were seeing multi-unit apartments. Even more often the case, things that would sort of look like single-family homes that had actually been divided into multi-unit dwellings.
So one ordinarily, when one thinks of a landlord charging enough rent to cover the mortgage and to cover the insurance. So what happens in the case of tenants who are displaced because of foreclosures from apartment owners or homeowners?
Well, that's a really good question. What happened that led up to that, and then what happens after? are two different, very good questions. We have, I think both Maeve and Lisa and I have both seen that oftentimes bringing a tenant into the fold is a homeowner's, second to last resort when they're trying to make the mortgage. And so particularly in pockets of San Mateo County that we've encountered where there are a lot of single family homes, the tenants that you would encounter would actually be living alongside the landlord, renting a room or renting the in-law apartment or, renting half of the house. We've seen all sorts of configurations of cozy living arrangements with homeowners. And the difficulty there is, of course, that, the tenant is brought in. Maybe they're told about why their presence is necessary. Maybe they're not. And to varying degrees may or may not have knowledge about the risk that the home is at. Once the sale occurs, what the Protecting Tenants at Foreclosure Act gave us was some enhanced rights of the tenant occupants that hadn't existed before. So now the tenants are very comfortably situated with a 90-day notice period where they have easily the 3-month period at least after the foreclosure and after getting notice of the new owner's intent to have them leave before they actually have to leave. Before that, we had some fairly anemic state laws that provided 30 days and then got enhanced to 60 days, but the 90 days was clearly much better.
Okay, good. We'll keep that in mind when we come back. And given HAMP and given HARP, how effective have they been just in terms of assisting clients? Because if you had 250 clients per month, given the increase in foreclosures, it doesn't seem like, just on the face of it, those laws have been very helpful, or have they been?
Yeah, in the long run, I think we will say at the end of the day that they were helpful. In the beginning years, it wasn't really working well because mortgage servicers refused to follow the rules. Our office filed class actions against three of the big guys.
Which would have been what, Wells Fargo?
Wells Fargo, Chase, B of A. Did we file against Wells that year? We filed actually against Chase, B of A, and Citi in 2010. And we weren't the only ones. I mean, nationally, folks were filing because everybody desperately wanted good options to be presented to homeowners, and it wasn't happening. And I think we had a huge educational process as a result of them refusing to implement the rules. That taught us all about what their real position is in this game. For them, it's a game. For the homeowners and the tenants, it is not.
Well, it seems if there are rules, you are obligated to follow the rules. And if you don't follow the rules, there's some penalties. So the rules were just in writing only on paper.
Yeah, these were rules that were issued by the Department of Treasury, and they were not enforcing them. Huge, disastrous problem.
And they were asked to enforce them.
Well, repeatedly by folks all over the country, advocates all over the country. So that really fast forward for a moment to last year, the Homeowner Bill of Rights. A huge coalition came together to try to get some state law protections because we were not getting any help at the federal level on enforcement. For 2 years, my office with California Reinvestment Coalition and ACE and other folks had pushed for an anti-dual tracking law to stop foreclosures from happening while people were in the middle of being considered for a loan modification. And it didn't pass, which it's kind of shocking to me in some ways. But when the AG's office, when our AG put her shoulder behind the proposition with a lot of other folks, we finally got some much needed protections, which I think overall the law has been effective.
Much needed laws, enforcement.
Enforcement, one of the beautiful things about the California Homeowner Bill of Rights, it has a private right of action. And what that means is that people can bring a lawsuit in court to enforce this law.
But that's not easy to do, I would think. If you're an individual homeowner, how do you take Wells Fargo to court?
you contact, our offices, right?
Exactly.
I mean, who can afford an
Exactly.
attorney? So our services are free, legal aid services are free. There's some Law Foundation of Silicon Valley. I mean, throughout the state of California, there's some wonderful nonprofits.
Now, you had talked about bringing class action suits, right?
Yes.
So, how effective have they been? And sometimes you think of class action lawsuits. You think of years,
Yes.
that they go through the courts.
Yeah, great question. They were not effective in terms of offering any kind of relief for the first 2 years, 3 years that they were moving forward. Sometimes class cases that move a little bit faster are much more effective. In this case, industry's just thrown hammer and tongs. They've really resisted on these cases. So in the meantime, that's why we needed to have a homeowner bill of rights to help individuals who were getting left out in the cold.
Okay.
And I have to interject that, the whole private right of action thing, that's huge, right? California should be really proud that, we sort of blazed that trail, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Because it's a very unpopular thing in many sorts of laws, consumer protection laws in particular. We see the argument, oh, well, this is just to make the lawyers rich. Like, the lawyers want this. They want to be able to sue Wells Fargo. I mean, believe me, I'd be happy to live a long life without ever suing Wells Fargo. But the private right of action is one of the only things that I think resonates with this industry.
Now, private right of action, that's an individual being able to sue.
That means you can sue. And that's what was lacking before, was this enforcement mechanism, right? To be able to say, okay, there's rules, but so what? Rules applied to an industry that's very, very used to walking that narrow line between what they want to do and what's profitable and what the rules are on paper. You really have to have an enforcement hammer or it's meaningless.
Well, I would think when you're up against a Wells Fargo, whether you're an individual or whether you have organizations such as yours, you're still dealing with a team of lawyers, right?
You are, and you can see that case after case you can see what some of the strategies are. From the same law firm that's representing the same entity across the state. There are collegial organizations of consumer advocates who also share information nationally, and that's helpful. We don't have the resources of a Wells Fargo, but we can share information, and it does make a difference. I would also say the courts have gotten more savvy. Both the bankruptcy courts and civil courts have gotten much more savvy about the stories that they are being told by industry folks who are showing up. And I bless the media for giving an opportunity to shine the light on what's really going on. That's made a huge difference. So we're all a lot better educated. People know more about their rights. They know they have some rights. And they know that you just can't take the word of folks who are on the other side of the table.
So let's talk about it for a moment under HEMP and under HARP. For the class action lawsuits that you brought, how effective were they in saving homes?
I would say that they have not saved homes because for most of them, injunctive relief was not permitted. The court was not willing to grant an order that says we're going to stop foreclosures for people pending the outcome of the lawsuit until the lawsuit is done. Whereas we have gotten that order for individual cases. So that's why our office has pursued both strategies. So we brought the class cases because, look, there was so much wrongdoing, you had to do it. You had to try. In the meantime, we've pursued individual cases, and so have other legal services agencies, so have some private attorneys. You have to address them one at a time because the courts have not been open to stopping foreclosures for wide groups of people here. I remember in Massachusetts, though, I don't know if you remember.
And it wasn't under Romney.
And it wasn't. It was not under Romney. Yes, a longer conversation. But I remember when there was an injunction against, and I'm not going to name the bank because I don't want to misname which bank, but the court was so offended by practices it saw it actually issued an injunction statewide against all foreclosures as to this one entity. But we haven't been able to pull that off in our state very well.
Oh, no, yes, go on.
This is one reason why the dual tracking prohibition was so important, though, right, Maybelline? Because the heartbreaking thing was seeing these homes going into foreclosure while you were saying, wait, you know, but you were supposed to consider this loan modification. You were supposed to do this. And what the occupants are left with after the sale has occurred is, well, you know, there may be some legal remedies that involve damages, but you're not going to keep your home. You're not going to get your home back. And the dual tracking provisions hopefully will prevent some of those missteps.
Now, talk about for a moment an injunction. When you get an injunction, what that says is, or what it means is, the homeowner or the tenant can stay in the home for a certain period of time.
Absolutely.
Until what?
Usually, well, our goal is always to get an order saying you get to stay there until the end of this lawsuit, right? And that would be the goal for both of us, for whether it's a tenant who's at stake or homeowners whose lives are at stake. And the court will grant that kind of order if the court thinks that the case has merit, that you're likely to succeed on the merits, and that the harm to that individual of being put out of their home is so great that it outweighs the harm of the bank or the person who.
Well, I would think any time a homeowner or tenant is put out of their home, that's a lot of harm being done.
It's hard to imagine a greater harm. The argument that one really needs to make to the court, though, is sort of the, you know, this is toothpaste you're not going to be able to put back into the tube kind of argument. Because what you see happen is once there's a foreclosure, well, you know, more and more, as from what I've seen just sort of anecdotally, an investor is going to come along and buy the property. Well, then what? What if it turns out that the foreclosure wasn't done properly and you're trying to rewind the clock? You have this other party in here with their own interests that are going to be harmed. So it's very hard to sort of unwind that situation and put the person back in the situation they would have been in after there's been a sale, because then there's been water under that bridge.
Has that happened often? Because, you know, we see, for example, in Stockton or places like that, houses on the market, foreclosed houses, and the whole neighborhood gets pulled down. And how many investors have come along?
Well, the investor levels have varied tremendously, and by location. I mean, but it's happening nationally, and there were. It's a key issue right now. The level of investor ownership that I think Shirley can speak to better than I, especially for East Palo Alto right now. But different localities, you have a lot of money coming in, and there are questions raised about the quality of the management. And also, if you've got a preference for a cash investor coming in and buying the home, what about the families who want to move in and buy and become first-time buyers, first-time homeowners? They're getting locked out of the market right now. And I don't know if you have more to say about how some of the cash investors have been. Do we know how they've been as landlords so far?
Good heavens.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have to say it's at least a contrast to what we were seeing when they were mostly bank-owned properties. I mean, let's be honest, Bank of America wasn't being a great landlord to East Palo Alto either, right? But at least they were a hands-off and not bothering you sort of landlord. They weren't fixing the plumbing, but they also weren't hassling anybody for rent or
Not just East Palo Alto, but any place.
And you know, the single family homes in particular, the most hassle that we would see tenants receiving would be, you know, the broker who was hired to try to sell the property, who might come around and heckle people and try to get them persuaded that they were supposed to be moving. And that's never pretty. But when you have an investor coming along, you're not talking about some big national financial institution that has, you know, a ton of these properties to cope with. You're talking about somebody with very focused attention on this property because it's part of a smaller portfolio that they're managing and trying to make profitable. And so the pressure tactics sometimes get far worse. Again and again, we hear stories from families where, you know, the investor came knocking on their door the day of the sale, telling them, you need to leave now or the sheriff's going to be here.
We've gotten those calls as well.
Exactly. I mean, and it's sort of appalling the extent to which people will be fed misinformation just try to convenience the investors. And not all investors are horrible, but but we have seen a few notable wrongdoers.
So what can you do in that case? Does it change? Does a strategy shift from the ones that you use in terms of the bank to the investors? I mean, with what you do with the investors.
Yeah, it's your strategies. There are some different strategies. One is to alert our regulators to the fact that we think that there's a serious problem. One of our partners, California Reinvestment Coalition, has really taken a lead on reaching out to regulators. There's a letter that our office and CRC and partner agencies are going to send out to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, actually also to the Securities and Exchange Commission, and HUD, to flag our concerns, our joint concerns about how our market is being moved by outside players. I mean, look at rent levels right now, right? We really feel as if between the combination of real estate owned properties being withheld from the market for so long, in some locations in particular, so you're shrinking the supply, while demand is increasing because people who've been foreclosed on are now getting pushed and dropping into the rental market. We have these astronomically rising rents, and at the same time, you have, when a bank does sell its real estate owned property, they'd rather sell it to the guy with cash, even if the guy with cash won't pay them as much. So what do average people get to do? And where are we going to get a chance to live when you have to pay $5,000 a month for a 2-bedroom in, San Mateo County?
This seems almost like some type of game that's being played. That this didn't just happen coincidentally, naturally.
Right.
Would you what do you think about that? I mean, just the fact that with the foreclosures, the banks not caring, investors coming along, or people being pushed out needing apartments, the rents go higher. This is all just a natural trend that happened?
There's nothing natural about what we are seeing now. I mean, the last time we got even close to what we're seeing to this time period in terms of the crash would be the Great Depression. It took 20 years after the Great Depression for home values to rise back up to the level that they were before the crash. What has it been here? 6 years? 2006 was really when the crash came to California, 7 years. And now you see prices posted for homes that are at pre-crash levels. This is much faster than after the Great Depression, even though we fell much further during this crash.
Would you call these pre-crash levels? I would almost think they're levels that were beyond, they're just the highest levels. I mean, when you have, for example, in Palo Alto, homes going for between $1 and $2 million. That wasn't happening about 2006. I would think it was less than that, much less than that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's not standard across the board.
Yeah, and certainly in terms of rents, I would say this is a steeper escalation than any of us could have anticipated, and it's still climbing.
Yes, it is. And the thing about it is the supply of housing is as you mentioned, it's shrunk. However, I'm thinking all of these foreclosed homes, they're like, in terms of the figures I just mentioned it in the start of the show, there are 900,000 homes for sale. Well, not 900,000.
I think even for some stage of foreclosure, I think.
Well, there was like 1,200,000 in a state of foreclosure, and just under 1 million listed for sale, which doesn't include the foreclosed houses. So you would think all of these foreclosed houses would be there for individuals to buy.
But that's not.
Are there that many investors coming along snatching them up?
Yes. Rent securitization is one of the things that's going on. Several different big players in motion right now. Big changes that are happening. Securitization of rental streams. Who would have thunk it? I never heard of such a thing. We've heard of mortgage. It took us years to figure out, oh, well, yeah, so that mortgage has been securitized, and that means there are many different owners of a piece of your mortgage. Okay. There are hedge funds that have put together investors to buy into a security that's based on tenants' rent payments.
Ah.
So if you think about that for a moment, let's think about what the implications are. I'm an investor, and the money I make is dependent on the amount of rent that a tenant is paying. Are the rents going to go up?
Of course.
Or are they going to go down? They're going to go up.
As
course.
high as the market will bear, right?
And then some.
Yes.
Because there's always going to be
Yes.
the fringe of that market that will pay more.
So, what's an average tenant or homeowner to do? It seems like the cards are already stacked against anybody out there trying.
Well, I think that we're going to be hanging tough, and that's a fact. In our market, we're just hammered. You've got people moving back out to Stockton, out to the hinterland. No offense to the hinterland, but
Any
moving
place
out to the hinterland where they're driving 2 hours to get to their work. That's not good for any of us. It's not good for the environment. It's not good for the people who are stuck in their cars for a couple hours.
Yes, half tired, not enough sleep,
Right?
frustrated.
It's dangerous.
Yes.
It's expensive.
Yes.
And we don't have enough affordable housing. So affordable housing advocates have really been on their job trying to get sources of funding, new recordation fees, as an example, to try to generate money so that we can build more housing and maybe build it where people's jobs are.
What's recordation?
Recordation is when you have to record a document with the county, like a grant deed or a notice of default, or any other
Now,
kind of
if those
document.
fees increase, and you're talking about it, but that hurts. That hurts the person who has to file a document for default, right?
It does, and it's generally the industry who's filing the document for default. The industry's argument against raising recordation fees has been that they're saying that they're going to pass that cost on to. Suddenly, they care about the homeowner. We're going to pass that cost on to the homeowner. Don't you care? And it's such a small amount of money compared to the real harm that people have experienced from loss of their home. To have money, I think that the balance should be in favor of raising some money to build some housing we can afford to live in.
Mm-hmm. Yes. However, there isn't that much land, would you say, around areas where people are working. And I understand you either have to build out or you have to build up. And you can't build out because there isn't that much available land space, right? So you have to build up, and who around here wants buildings going up? Higher.
Yeah.
I don't know. One Rincon Center? What is it?
We certainly do have to look at balancing density and, quality of life and transit-friendly development that is environmentally sound. I think we are all going to have to accept some compromises where density is concerned, simply because the clients that I deal with, the tenants that I am seeing who are on the very low income and extremely low income end of the scale, are being pushed to the very outer fringes of the rental market, where they are already having to have entire families rent a room in a house. People are doubling, tripling up in rental housing to be able to afford in this market, because you need multiple full-time jobs to be able to pay rent.
So who cares about them? Certainly developers won't care in terms of building affordable housing. They won't care if people or whole families are renting a room. So when you talk about density, who are you going to go to? Maybe, well,
You do have to step outside of the purely capitalist-driven, short-sighted, profit-minded planning modes. But communities care about maintaining, quality and diversity of that community. I mean, we're certainly grappling with that in, well, several communities in San Mateo County as you know, we revise our housing elements, our plans, community by community, for how we're going to house people across the entire spectrum of the economic income
So when
scale.
you say we, is the we in the minority? Is the we, you mention what, who?
Well, the
Communities.
cities and the county have to, you know, put forth these plans on how we're going to house all the economic income levels of our communities.
Now, somebody talked about like development plans, the general plans, and sometimes they get made, they get filed, and they go into a file cabinet someplace.
And that's where legal services organizations sometimes have to step forward, and there's that right of action thing that can make a difference. You know, it's certainly not something we've had to litigate lately in San Mateo County, but you know, historically, there have been instances where, you know, the plan didn't get followed or the plan didn't get made, and then you know, that government needed to be held accountable for not following through.
And these can be 10-year plans,
They
general
can.
plans, or 20-year plans, and it's not something where one expects to see immediately a housing development just go up.
No, but each plan, there is a legal obligation, though, to affirmatively further fair housing for any place that's accepting federal money. There is an obligation to attempt to house, not just to attempt, but to actually see to housing people who have great needs. That would include people with disabilities, seniors, low and moderate income folks, people of color, immigrants. We have communities, and I think getting back to that question of who cares, surely saying municipalities care, but I think also it is really the big we. Most of us do not want to know that there are 15 people living in the house next door that was really only intended to house 4 people.
If it's next door.
Yeah, there's that. There's that. Yeah, there are people who can isolate themselves or may feel they can isolate themselves from a problem. But I even think for a lot of those folks, I think they don't want to know that that's going on.